And the Chinese have always done it for reasons that are strategic and are important to them. They don't do it for India. They certainly don't do it for world or regional peace. They're doing it because there's something at stake for the Chinese. The skepticism comes from the fact that every time Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have met, it has been followed by something or the other at the border, some incident or the other. China gets riled and does what it does. This time around, the messaging was very clear from the Indian side that no matter what, you don't like our policies, we're okay. We can talk about that. But if you do this kind of transgression, it cannot be business as usual.
China playing the balancing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And Putin playing the mediator.
Putin
The optics of Putin being there with Chinese and the Indian leadership. So yes, this is a resolution to the current crisis. Not to the old boundary problem between India and China. That exists. This was one of the most difficult negotiations that they've done in recent times with China. And they've managed to come to an understanding. Let's hail that, but also be cautious. So cautious optimism.
Let's unravel Geeta's world. Hello and welcome. This is the 108th episode of Geeta's World. And Geeta is here. How are you? It's such a festive mood out here.
It is indeed. The entire office is now running to decorate. You know, people here are running to decorate their desks. So there's a little competition on as to whose bay is going to be the best decorated. Let's see who wins.
I always enjoy this Diwali week.
I know. It's always great.
It's always great, yeah. But today we are discussing something that is you can consider to be a good news, but you can consider to be like a not so good news as well, because, there are observers who are advising against it. They're saying that you need to be cautious.
Not against, just be cautious.
Cautious, yeah, right. That's the better word.
Yeah.
So we're talking about India and China, and last week, what people are saying that it is indeed a very breakthrough moment for both the countries. So how breakthrough it is, I think you'll be able to explain. But just for the brief, I think India and China, they both have, agreed to resume patrolling along the LAC, the line of actual control, in two areas, the Demchok region and the Depsang plains.
Last of the areas that were still had not seen disengagement by the troops.
Yes. So Geeta, I think this like I said, it was announced last week, and it actually came like a bombshell because we were not anticipating this from the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri saying this, because we were actually hoping that, okay, what is going to, the BRICS summit, what that will entail, will be briefed about that. But this was not like we saw it will pan out. And then days after, Prime Minister Modi went to Kazan, Russia for the BRICS summit, and we saw the famous spectacle, it worked well for the optics, the Modi and Xi's handshake. But yes, just a, brief, if you have been following India Today podcast, we have another podcast called In Our Defense, on which we have tackled the same issue, but on a military...
In fact, they actually explain militarily what these terminology really mean, what's going to happen, and how disengagement really takes place.
Right, on the ground. Yes.
That's Shivarur and Dev.
Yes. And but here, I think because it's a diplomacy pertaining podcast, so we'll be focusing on the diplomatic front. So let's try to answer, does this actually mark the beginning of the end of the 4-year standoff, or is just like a temporary lull, as they say? And why do we have to remain skeptical? Because it's China, and China is considered to be like a very treacherous country. But first...
I'm sure the Chinese would not like that.
Oh.
But not many in India care. Yeah.
That's what, yeah. So I'm just giving myself this liberty to say that. But anyway, so let's try to understand, Geeta, from you that, because first, like Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping met, and that was a spectacle. And this, I think the last time they had met was, such kind of interaction happened was 5 years ago, and in Brazil at on the sidelines of similar BRICS summit. Now, this agreement says that there's a broad consensus to so-called resolve this very contentious, outstanding border issue. So, how did we come to this point? What actually brought these two arch rivals together on the table to have these talks?
See, I think if you ask me, there are a lot of factors. China does not give in and take decisions as important and critical as this one so easily. So there are, I think, a few factors at play.
Mm-hmm.
One is that there have been quite a few number of diplomatic level and military level talks between the two sides, but nothing really changed. Let's go back to before the meeting really took place and set a preamble to what really happened.
Yeah.
And why did they arrive at where they are today. So before the meeting, we did not know that the announcement was going to take place and that Vikram Misri was going to really announce disengagement. And even when he did, there was no clarity on what kind, how it's going to happen. So a lot of skepticism, they're saying it, will the Chinese do it? And the Chinese have always done it for reasons that are strategic and are important to them. It does not, they don't do it for India. They certainly don't do it for world or regional peace. They're doing it because there's something at stake for the Chinese.
Right.
When we saw the news, the skepticism comes from the fact that every time Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have met, it has been followed by something or the other at the border, some incident or the other. When Mamallapuram happened, we had the whole Pangong incident.
Yeah.
Many such meetings, Mamallapuram is the Mahabalipuram, India-China meet. Many such meetings have always been followed by some transgression in Arunachal or some incident and, short of being violent, such as Galwan, but, scuffles between the forces on the Chinese side and the Indian troops at the border on the eastern front of the Ladakh sector, right? So we have seen a lot when it comes to India and China, and that's why the skepticism. What are the factors over here? I think that if you see how China is being cornered, one, China's economy is not in a good shape.
Yeah.
And China is being cornered by the West. There is immense pressure on dehyphenating, decoupling, but also on ensuring that there is certain isolation, economic isolation of China. India stands to play a very important role in the Indo-Pacific architecture. And the more India siding with America, the more China was getting riled.
Yeah.
But the more China gets riled and does what it does, this time around, this messaging was very clear from the Indian side that no matter what, you don't like our policies, we're okay. We can talk about that. But if you do this kind of transgression, it cannot be business as usual. And it was not business as usual. Then we have the two wars that have come. At this juncture, to have India completely on the Western side is not going to do well for China. So somewhere down the line, I suppose there were pressures.
Yeah.
There was, of course, Russia factor. See, optics play a very important role. When you say that, India can be mediator in this, that, and the rest, and, there are optics and photographs of Modi with Putin and then separately Modi with Zelensky.
Right.
The optics in Kazan spoke volumes, Anna, where you saw Putin in the middle, Xi Jinping on one side, Modi on the other side. Who was playing mediator here? So Russia did play a role where Russia made it very clear that this trio, which is originally the RIC, and RIC still exists, RIC meetings still take place, Russia, India, China, cannot be impacted so adversely because of what is happening at the border between India and China. Somewhere down the line, I think these factors are also important, where China does not want to, and then there's a lot of business happening. And we have an expert who, writes for us, Antara Ghoshal. She's a China expert.
Yeah.
She said that, in the Chinese chatter, there's a lot of chatter now that's on reports of investments coming from China to India, and the Chinese are saying, why are you doing that? Exactly what the West did with China, got all the investments here because it was cheaper, better, whatever reasons, and today China is where it is. You're actually making India, an indispensable force or a force to reckon with. So a lot of people are unhappy with that too, with Xi Jinping. I think there's a balancing act over here.
China
with
playing
the
the
Chinese.
balancing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And
yeah.
Putin playing the mediator.
Putin
The
playing-
optics of Putin being there with Chinese and the Indian leadership and playing the role, and Russia being the place where the
yeah.
big bilateral meeting took place. So I think there are a lot of factors, geopolitical, regional, global, but also bilateral, where this couldn't have continued for long. And I think Beijing realized that this time New Delhi is not going to buckle.
Yeah.
So the story is not about how great an achievement it has been of the two sides finding a solution. The story actually is about how great it has been for India to put its foot down and say, thus far and no further. It cannot be business as usual unless and until you move back.
Right.
Although there was a lot of business happening, but I'm just saying that they made it very clear that it cannot be business as usual.
As usual, yeah. So yeah, like Shiv also explained in that podcast that India this time has like spoken from a position of power.
Strength, yes.
Yes, the strength factor. And that's why the timing also sort of aligns, because the geopolitical, alienation that is sort of cornering China, and, China's doing something that is so-called not so China thing about the balancing act and everything. But
also, how much can you have a G7 where India is invited, a successful event, then you have the Quad, another successful event. How many such counter West blocks
are you going
where China and India are present, are they going to sabotage because of the bilateral relations?
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
So I think there's a line to be drawn, and that line has been drawn with very important messaging from India that India is not going to take these transgressions lying down.
Yeah.
But again, when the Pangong incidents happened after Mahabalipuram or other incidents that took place at the border, who knew that that would not be the end of it? And then, the next bilateral, Wuhan, so on and so forth. Who knew that that would not be the end of it? They solve it, and then again the leaders meet. And then Galwan happened. For the first time, you had dead soldiers on both sides since the war.
Right.
You've not had that, Anna.
Right.
So there is no guarantee that today disengagement is happening. Tomorrow you'll not see them pitching tents again. Or you're not sure that there'd be some incident in Arunachal.
I'll just come to that part a bit later. First, I just want to focus on this, because focus on the press statements that were issued by both the countries, because that became a point of contention, which many of the journalists and experts sort of dissected. And I'll just quote it. The Ministry of External Affairs said that Prime Minister Modi welcomed the recent agreement for complete disengagement and resolution of issues that arose in 2020 in the India-China border areas. And he emphasized the importance of handling differences in a way that ensures peace. But on the other hand, Geeta, China's official statement was more reserved. It said that, the two leaders commended the important progress the two sides had recently made through intensive communication on resolving the relevant issues in the border areas. And it noted that Prime Minister Modi made suggestions on improving relations, which President Xi he has agreed to in principle. But what is a bit alarming was that, the statement omitted mention of any specific agreement for complete disengagement. And China's foreign ministry spokesperson, Lin Jian, he said that when he was questioned by 3 international press organizations, he also did not endorse nor refute fully Indian claims of like a breakthrough in negotiations. So I just want to ask, why this difference? Well, like you explained, we can just shun this by saying that, oh, China is like this only, this is how it functions. So what really to expect? There will always be a deficit in the trust factor. But still, this deniability came just after the Indian media is hailing this. So how did you look at that?
Well, Anna, I'd also say this is how the Chinese are. But the fact is that there's a reason why they are the way they are, because they always want to have a room to go back. They don't want to be looking like as though they broke promises.
Okay.
So in the future, if something goes wrong, they'd say, well, we had agreed because we had certain conditions and Indian side had agreed, and now those conditions are not fulfilled, so we're going back. They've not openly said what the conditions are. They're not saying, and I'm not saying there are conditions, I'm just saying that they leave space and room not to be called traitors or,
But that's already the image.
No,
I mean,
it's
that's
not.
already how it's perceived.
Not by the Chinese. That's what you're saying. That's what certain sections of the Indian side say.
Right.
If you look at why are we saying joint patrolling? We claim it as Indian territory.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Now I get it.
But why are we saying joint patrolling? Because it is disputed right now between India and China.
Yeah.
So China is also claiming it as their territory.
Yeah.
And then there are traditional areas where Indian side was always there. There are traditional areas where the Chinese side was always there. And then there's this no man's land sort of a space where you have your cattle, your sheep graze. So that's grazing land. And patrolling happens over there jointly, where the Chinese patrol and the Indian patrol. And when patrolling is happening, sometimes they also end up having scuffles if they come face to face.
Yes. Yeah,
Otherwise, the timings are also different when
and
they
deliberately also leave some cigarette stops or something like that just to
just to claim. Sometimes just pitch a flag and leave, or leave Chinese products. So there is a problem. The Indian side has been saying that this is their territory, and if you go back and see, they have taken more than they were traditionally positioned at. And India has lost some space, but has not stopped claiming those areas as well. Galwan was a huge breach. It was a huge breach by the Chinese side. Pitching tents over there was a huge breach. That aside, now we're looking at Depsang and Demchok, the last of the few areas that they were still holding on to.
Yes.
In fact, we had held on to one of the hilltops, which traditionally was not held by us. And then they did say that, you come down in the understanding and we'll go back from these areas. And we came back down and they didn't. So that, you have to ensure that they move to be trusted. Now, what we're given to understand and the information that has come in is that the disengagement has happened, which means they have disengaged from those places.
Okay.
And the Indian troops and the Chinese troops, the officers, the commanding officers, would be inspecting the areas to see whether the thing has been done. Coming back to your question on the statement, it's not just this question in a press conference where he tried to evade. After the meeting, the Indian side, and during the meeting, the brief remarks by Prime Minister Modi, he did mention the de-escalation, disengagement, and that, Chinese troops are going to go back. It's good news. We welcome no mention by the Chinese president. And later, when the statements came, the Indian side again mentioned the fact that, India welcomes the decision. But look at the Chinese statement. The Chinese statement talk again about the same thing. Both are ancient civilizations, developing countries, significant to the global south. Both countries should now. This is important. This is what they have been saying all along. So it's quite preachy.
Right.
You see?
Okay.
This is what the statement says. He stated that both countries, he meaning the Chinese president, stated that both countries should correctly grasp the historical trends and development direction of their relationship, which aligns with the fundamental interests of both nations and their peoples. again, they should enhance communication, support. Additionally, both nations should take on international responsibilities to serve as a model for developing countries in a unipolar world, and the democratization of international relations, which is where they're saying that the international world order is changing. But the fact that he keeps saying that you should grasp historical trends, and also there are so many statements where they say you should act more maturely. I'm just paraphrasing it, but on those lines. So they are preachy. They did not mention disengagement, even after the meeting has taken place.
That's
what they said was that it's good that we're moving forward. That's all, because they don't want to be seen like somebody accepting defeat, or that agreeing to somebody else's demand. On record, they will never put it, because they don't want the people to see that, okay, China agreed to disengage. Who's disengaging? Who is moving back?
Exactly.
They're never going to accept it. So they're never going to state it. They'll say we have come to an agreement to solve or to resolve the problem areas between the two countries. If somebody asks, now this is for the Indian side, right? If their own people ask, they'll say, yeah, we have asked them also to move back. They were also sitting in areas which are ours, right? The narrative within China is also very different. And that's why the statements look different. There will be no mention of disengagement by the Chinese side. No matter how much, Prime Minister Modi goes and thanks them in public view and on camera, Chinese side is not going to accept it.
If we are acquainted with this Chinese, diplomacy language, I don't know how it has trickled down to India being using all sorts of adjectives that we can think of. And that's tragic, actually. But just one thing that I wanted to ask you regarding, like you were explaining, on the very ground level. I think let's also talk about the buffer zones here. Because like we explained, I mean, like you explained, this border agreement is being hailed like a very great diplomatic move, especially by Indians who support the BJP, who support Prime Minister Modi, and is being touted as, evidence of India being able to pressure China. But let's not forget, Geeta. I mean, I still remember how the Indian public was kept in the dark at the time of the Galwan Valley clash. After the whole country got this news that this has happened because of Chinese incursions, Prime Minister Modi came on air in a televised address, and he said that no such incursion has happened by the Chinese, which obviously seemed quite bizarre because like
What was the
2020
statement? घर में ना कोई घुसा ना कोई
ना
घुसेगा.
कोई घुसेगा, right? Yeah. So that was the statement, and it was quite bizarre because we know that 20 Indian soldiers were killed, and I think five Chinese soldiers were killed, although we don't know the exact data.
No, but technically, these are two separate matters. They were killed in the Galwan area.
Right.
And the question was about, are they still there?
Are they still there?
And then, of course, everybody knows that the clashes took place, and
Exactly.
we at least accepted and owned our dead. We still don't know how many Chinese died.
Right.
Officially, I think they're 3.
I think that's what, 3 or 5, I think, but what I wanted to come at is later, like, they created all these buffer zones along the LAC. Areas like these buffer zones are areas where both armies wouldn't be allowed to patrol. So these would essentially be like demilitarized areas, the zones. And we know from very credible sources that this also went against India because these buffer zones were created on the Indian side of the LAC. So it basically meant that the Indian army would just retreat further back into its territory. And the agreement that has been struck now does not include removal of these buffer zones. So even though Geeta S. Shankar is claiming that we are essentially moving to that pre 2020 status quo, the buffer zones will remain, and no one in the government is talking about it. So why do you think right now the Indian government is reluctant to share the full details, transparently with its people? That is my question. Or if, I mean, of course, you'll weigh in but we still don't have the full picture as to how this is going to take place
So
and where the
according,
buffer
yeah,
zones
so
are.
according to reports, because both sides are still undecided on the buffer zones, there is going to be a lot of problem. There will be a lot of resistance from the Indian side.
Yeah.
Now they might want buffer zones, but it will be, like you said, to India's disadvantage, because it would be on, according to reports, on the Indian side of the areas which were erstwhile patrolled by us, or we had more, right to.
Yeah.
Be in those areas. But the problem is that right now, only two areas, Demchok and Depsang, is where disengagement completely has taken place. There's still other areas that are left. Meanwhile, there is going to be inspection that will take place, but there's no decision on the buffer zone itself.
Yeah.
So they're still waiting to see the defining the buffer zones has really not happened yet. So that has to happen. Then we'll be able to assess and see what are the areas that have been defined as buffer zones, and how much of a strategic loss would that be for India, if at all. I don't think India will allow or give in to such demands that could be a massive strategic loss to India. But we'll still have to assess when it happens. Right now, it has not happened. They have, I think, in principle agreed to it.
Yes.
But on ground, it has not happened yet.
Yeah. So that will, I think, unfold another chapter.
Yeah, it just
and
depends.
another-
Things, I don't know whether if it'll get tensed,
Yeah.
whether if China will walk back on the agreement itself.
Right. Actually, to my amazement, I was reading this article by The Economist, which said, "What if China and India became friends?" And that it was published like a year ago, and it said how Chinese view India. They say that just talk down upon us like anything and call out names and everything. So that's there, but it was just like a speculation that what if all the border disputes and everything is just set aside, and what if they, became friends, and how beautiful, not, I mean, this was not the word that they used, but it's like how beautiful it would look like if China and India I mean, they became friends, and it would just be like a counter attack to, the West's prowess.
But can I just say this?
Yeah.
That this is the story in most parts of South Asia. A lot of people on the Western side say the same thing. What if India and Pakistan were not? What if they were great friends?
Yeah.
Then we would not have US taking advantage of the situation over Afghanistan,
Right.
because there's no competition between India and Pakistan. There wouldn't be.
Yeah.
If there was no space of or room for Pakistan and India to really be enemies, then there would be no issue of terrorism in most parts of the region. And if Pakistan wouldn't have allowed it, there certainly would not have been much that would have happened in the AFPAC region as well.
Yeah.
And because India would have always come in support of Pakistan, what if that would have happened? So the entire South Asia,
Yeah.
we're seeing problems. If those problems cease to exist, at this point in time, there isn't a region that is thriving economically more than South Asia, that could have become a powerhouse and a counter to East and West. Because you have in the Far East and Southeast,
Yeah.
you have so many countries who are doing so well. For us, the biggest impediment are the geostrategic issues and our problems with our neighbors.
That's true.
That pull us down so much. How much do we spend in defense? Not defense meaning research and innovation. Defense meaning really real defense on the ground.
On the ground itself, yeah.
We're spending a lot of money there. If there was no problem between India and Pakistan, we wouldn't have invested so much on the ground. Maybe we would have spent more in research and having more high-tech stuff.
Yeah.
So these ifs will continue, Anna. The whole region is about if.
Yeah, what if?
What
It's
if
like
there was peace? We would have been a force to reckon with. because nobody could have played one against the other using the China card, using the Pakistan card, I mean, for India, so many cards have been used against us to, to bring us to our knees, sorry to say, but in the past. And now I think things are changing a little where the dynamics worldwide has changed.
Right.
And there's a wake up call to countries like the US that there is no superpower.
Yeah.
Because in the past, if you were a superpower, be it Soviet Union, Russia, erstwhile, or the United States of America, if they said something in a room, other leaders not just heard them, but also listened to them. Today, that's not the case. Look at America telling Russia to stop, now telling Israel to stop. Nobody's listening.
Exactly.
So in a scenario when where you're in a multipolar world, there are many power hubs and houses. If this region was secure and safe, and without the problem of South Asian rivalry and propping terrorists, then we actually would have done very well.
Seems like a utopian idea, but like, can we actually pinpoint one single failure that has led to this? Or
no, there isn't a single failure.
No,
There are
right?
so many layers to geopolitics. You can't say just
We can't
one.
even say that this was like
But
the
we can
initiation.
surely say that whatever the factors that led to where we are today,
Yeah.
in terms of our security scenario, in terms of our relations with our neighbors, the position that we're in, all of that included, and a lot of the domestic politics in every country also of the region, is why we are not a force to reckon with.
Wow. That's actually like, I think we should do.
Although, a lot of people would say India is, but I'm talking about South Asia.
Yeah.
India could have been way more.
Yeah.
India could have been way, way more.
But right now, what it seems is just you have to live with that neighborhood stereotype that is actually imploding. So yeah, I think just one last thing, because I was meaning to ask you this, although you have said this, but just to so to bring this to a conclusion, Geeta, there was Ashok Kantha who had joined Rajingappa in one of his podcasts, Nothing But the Truth, and he's the ex Indian ambassador to China. He was there when the Galwan clash happened. And he was asked that whether are we like really on the threshold of like a thaw or like a rapprochement or with China. And he said that we shouldn't just jump to this conclusion because we have several issues with China. And China is going to be one of our, most like strategic challenges ever.
It already is.
It is, and it will continue to be.
Yeah.
So,
not just that, not just a strategic challenge, a threat too. If we're looking at supremacy, a rising India is a threat to a risen China, an already risen China.
We don't have to confuse this agreement as a resolution, right? That's first
thing. No, it is a resolution.
No, resolution as in when you're because it is the
perception.
perception.
It is a resolution, Anna.
Right. It is
it's not. It is.
Okay.
It is a resolution.
But it is not a resolution to the border dispute as it is being perceived as.
No.
This is how it is being trickled down to.
No. One, India, China have a long-standing boundary question that needs to be resolved, which is declaring an international boundary between India and China, defining what that boundary looks like.
Yeah.
Why are we saying that this is a resolution where there will be patrolling areas and buffer zones? Is because there is no defined international border between the two countries. So there is already an all encompassing old boundary question between India and China. It's long standing. It'll require many, many more decades maybe to resolve or to define. But what happens is that this is the boundary question.
Yeah.
And then every now and again in this sector, in the eastern sector, western sector, mid sector, something flares up. And the traditional areas that are held in the disputed territory, the areas that are held, Chinese come onto the Indian side So, mostly it's this way only, not the other way.
Yeah.
And then there's a pushback happening. So, such an incident has happened all over again. They've kept all the other boundary questions aside and they're saying, first, let's resolve this.
Yeah.
Because nothing like this has happened in the past, where you have Galwan happening, soldiers killed. These guys have moved up to Demchok and Depsang. They were on the finger points in Pangong Lake. My God. That kind of transgression has never happened, right? So that was a new situation. So what the government said was that keep all the other outstanding issues aside. Let's just first deal with this. So yes, this is a resolution to the current crisis, not to the old boundary problem between India and China. That exists and that will exist till the time they sit and resolve it. And there's an international border between India and China. That has not happened. It's still disputed. It's still unresolved. It still is a question. So we call it the boundary question between India and China.
Yeah.
These current crises that we see, many of them, those crises are the ones that have been taken care of which currently they have managed to disengage in Depsang and Demchok.
Yes.
So there is a resolution, but I thought you were asking about the resolution itself, to which my answer is that yes, there's a resolution, but please don't treat it as like permanent.
No, I'm saying
there have been many incidents in Depsang.
Trust me, Geeta, when I'm saying this like on a WhatsApp language because that is how it is being perceived as.
Yeah.
And that's how I think.
No. The India-China boundary question is a long, outstanding issue between the two countries. It'll take a while to resolve. This was about the current flare-ups.
So you can say that this is a stepping stone or it's not?
It is not a stepping stone to the larger boundary issue. The boundary issue is separate. It'll have to be. It is just a stepping stone, maybe, to bringing the ties back to certain semblance of normalcy. It cannot be normal. There's a lot of trust issue. So basically, what has happened, even buffer zones are not being defined. Is because they're saying first let the disengagement in Depsang and Demchok happen, which has happened.
Yeah.
Now they'll go and inspect. Let some trust building happen, and then we'll talk about buffer zones, because we don't trust you. You have a buffer zone where you want us out. And then what happens tomorrow when you come and pitch tents? Trust deficit between India and China. Unless and until that is resolved, there is no permanent resolution.
Then just one thought, that when we know that China works like this, and we know that China has very good reasons, like you explained, the cornering by the West and everything, tariffs and whatever, then why did India also sort of give in? I'm saying given because I'm saying
because it is to our advantage. If the Chinese are going to withdraw, isn't that to our advantage? They're giving back our space. That was our ultimate goal. We will, of course, agree. They might have the conditions. Let's see what those buffer zones are going to look like. Let's wait.
Yeah. Okay. And just lastly, when Jaishankar says that this shift did not occur overnight, and the defense hosts also explained how in the past 4 years the military has succeeded to have such a scenario right now. And they also said that this had to happen on a diplomatic front, because military is one level, but diplomacy is one level, and this sort of negotiation had to happen on a diplomacy front. So if you look back at the 4 years span, and S. Jaishankar is also hailing both diplomacy and the military front. So how do you see the diplomacy factor being panning out?
It was very important.
Succeeding?
It was very important, Anna, because even on the military front, there were talks happening. So even the militaries of both sides were talking. So there was the diplomatic engagement, and there was diplomacy at play at the military level as well. They were not warring against each other. They were not going and fighting and saying that, we'll see who wins, the stronger will gain control. No, they were sitting and talking across the table. Generals were sitting and talking, or corps commanders were sitting and talking across the table.
Across the table, okay.
So there was diplomacy at play, which is why Dr. Jaishankar is right in saying that it was diplomacy that was at play. Nobody can afford a war. Nobody can even afford a skirmish today. There's no space for that. There is no space. There is no wherewithal. There are no instruments. So to say, when I say instruments, I don't mean weapons. I'm saying there are no instruments to allow military warfare at this point in time, and winters are going to set in. Don't ever forget that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the
That's
timing
one of
was
the
right for
factors.
them
Yeah.
to disengage at this point in time, holding on to positions in a very difficult terrain, difficult weather conditions. And then if something happens over there with hardly any
Yeah.
supplies coming in, it would have been very difficult. So they were also on, they were also a bit of, they were a bit time bound.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we say that, but I hope we don't see any sort of skirmishes.
I hope so too, but don't cross your fingers. Don't hold your breath. Please don't hold your breath.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
The Chinese, if it's not Depsang or Demchok, it could be Ladakh, other parts of Ladakh. It could be Daulat Beg Oldi, which we've seen.
Yeah.
It could be Arunachal, even the middle sector. So it could be anywhere. But the Chinese, you just don't know what provokes them. And when they're provoked because of
Or
something
it's actually
somewhere, it
provoking or
all,
not.
yeah.
We don't even know that.
No, mostly what provokes them. Like if tomorrow Modi has a meeting, a quad meeting, that might, and there's
They were
some
like,
a joint statement that comes out which is saying,
yeah.
we need to counter aggressive countries, not even naming China,
Yeah.
and they provoke, something will happen in Arunachal. So you just don't know. So don't hold your breath. Let's just
Right.
take one step at a time for now.
Hmm.
This was one of the most difficult negotiations that they've done in recent times with China, and they've managed to come to an understanding. Let's hail that,
Yeah.
but also
Be
be
cautious.
cautious. So cautious optimism is the
Lovely.
word.
Lovely. That's how I'm going to headline this.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Geeta. It was such a wonderful episode, and I'm sure I'm going to pass this to my family members so that they just don't hail it as everybody else is, hailing. Cautious optimism is the word. And thank you so much to all our listeners and viewers if you stayed till the end and gained a lot of insights from Geeta. Please, don't hesitate in messaging us and leaving your comments and liking, subscribing. Everything that you have to do are mandatory. This is a Diwali week, so I'm just expecting you to be, more gracious and do everything. And yes, so thank you so much. And there's a number there which is 8588 966 or you could also drop in your messages on pods@indiatoday.com. Thank you and a very happy Diwali to you and to you, Geeta.
To you too, and to our listeners and viewers, a very, very happy Diwali. Wishing you a prosperous year ahead, and please continue watching or listening to us.
Like
It's
Geeta
always
says,
a pleasure.
don't burst crackers, please.
No crackers, please. Don't pollute. And a lot of people would say, before we go,
Yeah.
a lot of people would say, oh, but this is happening, that is happening, and nobody's complaining, and a few crackers. Everything matters.
Yeah.
Every little thing that you do or not do matters. It matters to the future generations. You've lived a good life. Give your future generations also a good life. So please stop polluting unnecessarily.
Yeah. Thank you.